Camp meeting, but I could be wrong. But I think at our last camp meeting, Tabo did a presentation on Samuel Snow and the Seven Thunders. Does anyone remember that?
Yes.
Was that at our camp meeting that he did that?
Wasn't it here?
Did he do it here also? Okay, maybe he did it here. So you're familiar with that. Tabo. Okay, so evidently not all of you are familiar with it. I don't intend to repeat his presentation, but I do intend to start with the line that he uses to show Samuel Snow and the Seven Thunders and explain the significance of it. I've reached a point in my experience in this work to where I'm under conviction that I'm not to be the one that's the cutting edge of digging out all this new light, but that my experience is supposed to put my amen upon those men that are doing that, and those men are doing that now. So I'm going to try to share some of my experience here. We had meetings last week in Northern California. Central California is probably more accurate. And there was a family there that's going to be here tomorrow. I thought they were going to be here tonight. And in Central California, what I was dealing with was the message that's in Daniel 11, 1 through 39. Just the breakdown of what the message represents. But there is also a significance of the message in prophetic history. The message that comes in at this time is a waymark. It is marked, and it's a message that you either receive or you're lost. Okay, you have to receive this message. It's the message that is the seventh seal. So last weekend we were dealing with some of the characteristics of that prophetic message. And that family that was here, I thought this weekend I want to go back and show them that message as a waymark in prophetic history. And a place to start is with Samuel Snow. So I'm going to just take, these are notes from Tabo. And how many are familiar with the Seven Thunders? Everyone in here is familiar with the Seven Thunders. Last week I laid out the Seven Thunders off the top of my head, so to speak, just to do a review for the audience. And I sense that even though some of us understand the Seven Thunders, we didn't understand it very well, okay? Because you have the last 7 kings of Israel, the last 7 kings of Judah can be understood to represent the Seven Thunders. And Sister White says the Seven Thunders represents the delineation of events that transpire under the first and second angel's messages. And in the same passage, she says the Seven Thunders relate to future events that will be disclosed in their order. So we've known since we worked at Hope International, because there used to be a doctor that worked at Hope International when I worked at Hope International, that him and I used to bump heads on what the Seven Thunders represented, okay? So we've been bumping heads on the Seven Thunders for, that would be over 20 years, okay, 20 years ago. And it has developed. We knew it was the history of the Millerites from 1798 to 1844. Then we understood that it would be the history of 1989 to the Sunday Law. And then we realized that it was typified by the last 7 kings of Israel, the last 7 kings of Judah. And we realized that when you take those 2 Seven Thunders, that you see the coming together of the 2 sticks. And then we realized that the Seven Thunders is also illustrated in the first 7 kings of Israel and the first 7 kings of Judah. And in that history, you see the breaking apart of the 2 sticks. In our study of Esther, we came to realize that the 7 Persian kings in the immediate history surrounding Esther is the Seven Thunders. So the Seven Thunders has grown in its understanding. I've also understood that in Revelation 10, when the angel comes down and puts his foot upon the land and upon the sea, and he cries as a lion roareth, and when he crieth, 7 thunders uttered their voices, and John was about to write what the 7 thunders uttered, and the angel told him, write not what the 7 thunders uttered, that angel came down on August 11th, 1840. So that way Mark is typifying 9/11. And August 11th, 1840, you see the seven thunders put into prophetic history, but at that point, it was to be sealed up. But in Revelation 22, verses 10 and 11, just before the close of probation, there's a pronouncement that the time is at hand to, how does it say it in verse 10? Seal not those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand. Therefore, my argument is if the seven thunders were sealed up immediately after August 11th, 1840, then immediately after 9/11, they were unsealed. And the historical fact is after 9/11, that's when we really begin to see the seven thunders as producing light. Okay, so that's leaving off a lot. That's leaving up William Miller's dream. But in any case, we have many illustrations of the seven thunders, and the seven thunders represent the history of the Millerites from 1798 to October 22nd, 1844, and they also represent our history from 1989 till the door closes. Used to say to the Sunday law, but now that fractals have come in, we say till the door closes, because the door closes at the Sunday law for Adventism in general, at the midnight cry for the Levites, at midnight for the priests. Anyway, let me lay this out and explain to you the logic of what I'm doing here. 1798 is the time of the end. What I'm saying is, Samuel Snow's message of the midnight cry can be marked in this history of the Millerites, and there are 7 primary waymarks in there. So you can illustrate it. And you want to do that because there's an argument going on now about the message of the midnight cry. Does it come after probation closes at midnight, or does it arrive before probation closes at midnight? Okay, there's some arguments about whether probation closes at midnight, but there is an argument that's going on now that says that there is no significant light from the book of Daniel until after midnight. Okay, and I'm not too threatened by that argument, and I don't, because it's wrong, and I don't intend to spend time addressing that argument and the connected arguments as we go through here this weekend. But Sister White and the Bible teach that the Lord allows heresies to come in among us in order that we might be forced to study. Okay, Sister White says it that way, and Paul says it that way. And so there's something about midnight that in this argument that's going on that tells me there is depths of truth connected with it that even those of us that are on the right side of the issue have not recognized, and this argument has been allowed to come in order to take us to a deeper level of understanding. So this is Millerite history, Seven Thunders as we understand it, 1816 to 1818. This is the 2 years that William Miller is studying the message. Sometimes in Brother Tabot's notes here, he has 1833 as the message being formalized. And I get that. I taught that for years. My argument for teaching that was that Miller receives his credentials in 1833, and the stars fell in 1833. But 1831 is the first time his message went public. So you can take that approach too. This is the first time Miller's message was published was 1831. And he was also received an ordination in 1834. I think they're all valid, but I'm just acknowledging that Tabot puts 1833, but I'm putting 1831 for the publishing. And then we have the first disappointment, as Brother Tabot is marking them out here. And then July 21st, that's 7, right? July is 7?
Yes.
And then August 15th. All right, and then 10:22. Okay, so this is the midnight cry at Exeter. This is the same presentation that Samuel Snow did at Boston. And he did it, this is 25 days apart. Okay, this is the first disappointment. This is the first day of the first month of 1844, first day of the first month. This is the 10th day of the 7th month. This is the day in 457 BC that Ezra leaves Babylon. In the first day of the first month, 457 BC. And he arrives in Jerusalem on August 15th, 457 BC, which is the first day of the 5th month, 457 BC. But it was August 15th, 1844. And when he left Babylon, he had the third decree in his hand, and the third decree goes into effect on the 10th day of the 7th month, which was October 22nd, 1844. Do we all understand those little nuances? Yes? How about you, Brother Brian? You're working on it. Anyone else that is kind of iffy on? Because I don't mind spending a little bit of time here. Now, this is the way that Brother Tabot has this laid out in order to illustrate his presentation on Samuel Snow. Arguments can be made on a different way to represent the seven thunders in Millerite history. And when we first dealt with them, there was three primary ways that people were arguing. They were saying you could see these seven waymarks because in both cases, Sister White says, the seven thunders represents a delineation of events that would transpire under the first and second angel's messages. If you have an Ellen White study Bible, under Revelation 10, you can see that quote. And then another place she says the seven thunders represent future events. So in both cases, whether it was Millerite history or future history, she uses the word events. So once you begin to grapple with what are the seven events that would take place in this history, there are some variations. Some of them may or may not be valid. But one of them, once we started grappling with it, that came to light was that there are 7 time prophecies that come to fulfillment in this history. I'm not even sure that that's true. I thought maybe you could get 8. But there were some people that said it was the time prophecies that came to fulfill in this history. And then others would say it's the 7 major events from 1798 to 1844. But others would argue that from August 11th, that would be 8/11/1840, when the angel came down, they would include that as a waymark. And when the angel came down with the book open in his hand in 1840, you can show 7 events from 1840 to 1844. More often than not, that's how I would illustrate it early on. What I want you to recognize, if you're familiar with this or not, 1798 is the arrival of the first angel. First angel arrives, and this is the empowerment of the first angel. So at one level, this waymark, they're both the waymark of the first angel. So if you put 7 events here, 7 events here, you're not necessarily contradicting yourself. And you can show that in different prophetic ways as well. But in the story of Samuel Snow, okay, here's how my brother breaks it down. And I don't have a problem with anything that I'm going to put on this line here from his approach. And I want to put it up there to make a point. He's going to start a history of Samuel Snow in May of 1843. 543. And what happened in May of 1843 is William Miller sends a letter where he predicts that what he believed would be the second coming of Christ is going to take place in the autumn of the year based upon the feasts. Okay? So Miller puts this letter into the public record here, and Samuel Snow is going to take this piece of information, he's going to build upon it. Okay? Now this becomes an issue for us at the end, because I know of 4 people now that have, is it 4? 4 people who have claimed to be the modern fulfillment of Samuel Snow. Okay? So if you're wanting to get to that level, then you have to hold the historical characteristics of Samuel Snow. And I'm not pushing anything here, but all of these people that infer or claim that they're Samuel Snow, they'll also identify me as a historical figure in Millerite history, all right? And the problem with that is that Miller opens up this subject here, and Samuel Snow builds upon what Miller put in place. So Samuel Snow's presentation was in agreement with Miller, and these guys that are suggesting that they're Samuel Snow, they're in agreement with they're not in agreement with the teachings of Future for America. So if you're going to get historically accurate, then you need to hold to that. But we also showed last week, and it can be showed, maybe we'll get to that again today, that Samuel Snow in the Millerite history typifies Elisha. And Elisha doesn't reveal himself until after midnight prophetically. So for anyone to claim to be Elisha or Samuel Snow before midnight, they're breaking the biblical pattern, because Sister White plainly says that Elisha's family was one of the families of the 7,000 in Israel that had not bowed a knee to Baal, and that he was hidden. So Elisha is in the hiding time, and there's a definite hiding time. It's not until after the hiding time that an Elisha or a Samuel Snow would manifest themselves. Once again, if you're not following this message close enough, you don't know what inferences I'm making here, but the arguments that are going on right now on planet Earth have to do with people that are claiming to be Elisha or Samuel Snow. Okay, so in February of 1844, 244, Samuel Snow writes a letter to a pioneer named Southard, okay, where he's beginning to develop the message that is going to be the Midnight Cry message, all right? And it gets published in April 3rd of 1844. And then we come to the first disappointment, which is 4/19/44. Everything else here is going to be 44. And you need to understand that even though Samuel Snow's working on this understanding before April 19th, okay, April 19th, logically, is pointing to the time where the Lord removes his hand from this corner of this chart, okay, because Sister White says there's a mistake, singular mistake, in some of the figures on this chart, and the figures, plural, was the 2520 and the 2300. And logically, he removed his hand when the year 1843 concluded. So on the first day of 1844, which would be April 19th, the first day of Cariite reckoning, 1844, would be April 19th, 1844. The logic of it is that's when the Lord removed his hand. Even though I understand Samuel Snow before that time is putting these things together, now Samuel Snow's message is going to predict that it's not 1843, it's 1844, but not only is he going to predict the Lord's going to return in 1844, but he's going to have the month and the day, October 22nd. So you have to factor in that not until he gets to this day does the possibility of 1843 disappear. Okay, so this is an important part of this layout, is the removing of his hand. Because in Daniel chapter 11, verse 10, the Lord removed his hand from our message here last December, and it's produced a similar manifestation in our understanding as what went on in this history with Samuel Snow. So paying attention to the fact that the Millerite history, the Lord had held his hand over one singular issue, the fullness of the year, is, if you understand Millerite history is going to be repeated to the very letter, then it's giving you the logic to understand that the Lord held his hand over one singular issue in our history. And now that he's removed his hand, it's amazing the type of light that's being produced from Daniel 11 and other parts of Scripture. So here is the Boston, right on time, this is the Boston Tabernacle presentation, and then Exeter camp meeting presentation. This is just the line of Samuel Snow, and then 10:22. Now this is midnight. That's what the pioneers called midnight. But Sister White called it midway, okay? Sister White in the Great Controversy says midway between the time when they first thought the Lord would return and the time when they afterward understood him to be returned, the midnight cry message was preached. That's a paraphrase. But here's where they first thought the Lord was going to return. And they afterwards came to understand he returned there on October 22nd, 1844. And if you count the days, okay, from April 19th to October 22nd, the dead center is July 21st, 1844. The pioneers would call that midnight. Sister White called it midday, if you want to check it out in her writings. Midway, yes. And this produces Ezra 7:9 produces some nice symbols in here with numbers. I've put one in here. I won't go there at this time. So what I want you to see here is that right here in May 2nd, 1844, that what Samuel Snow is going to present at Boston and what he's going to repeat and present at Exeter, he put it into a newsletter, into a publication right here on the 2nd of May. Okay, so this is what we understand to be midnight. And the argument, one of the arguments that is going on now is that there is no light before midnight. And this is based upon, if we don't have the history of Samuel Snow to break down July 21st and August 15th and put it into the prophetic sequence of events, if that's not available for us, then we don't know anything about midnight. Okay, I guarantee that's the starting point for our understanding of midnight, is that the pioneers understood that this was midnight, this date, and Sister White says it's midway. If that history hasn't taken place, then as students of prophecy here at the end of the world, we look at Millerite history, we have no witness from that history to mark a waymark that we call midnight. You follow me? Now afterwards, there's lots of biblical witnesses to midnight. Christ was arrested at midnight, okay, on and on. There's lots of biblical witnesses. But where we plug midnight into the Millerite history is the Boston presentation on July 21st. Okay, so when we're now grappling with the implications that midnight's about to take place on planet Earth and probation's about to close for the priest, we now have a teaching that there is no significant prophetic message that takes place before midnight. Okay? And we're arguing that there is one before midnight. And we're arguing that because Samuel Snow put this very presentation that he did at Boston and Exeter into the public record on May 2nd. These notes have that presentation, and it's the Midnight Cry message. So now, if just unsure, maybe everyone's familiar with all the logic that I'm doing, but go to Daniel chapter 10.
What are those notes you have there? Do we have
These are the notes from Tabot that I probably have on my computer, but I can't guarantee that because last week in California, Dwayne Dewey asked me for a set of another set of Tabot's notes, and I told him I'd get it to him, and then I realized they're on my computer at home, they're not on my laptop. So I don't know that I have those here with me, but we can make them available.
And they might be on the internet if you look up that presentation.
Yeah, they're around somewhere, okay? But I just intended to take a couple points out of here and move on, and I can make this available afterwards. Where was I going with that right now?
Daniel 10.
Daniel 10. Okay, so you, good for you. Go to Daniel 10. How many don't know about the 3 touches in Daniel 10? Don't be shy.
Have them underlined.
Okay.
Not knowing them, I can't tell somebody else.
Okay, you can't teach them. And I'm not trying to teach them, okay, but I will teach them a little bit, all right? Let's start early on. Maybe this, and see, this is what's, I want to say this for all of us that have been in this message for a long time. I saw this last week. I was doing last week a kind of what you would call a basic presentation, as I intend to do here this Sabbath. But I realized last week that the majority of the people that were in that room that are experienced in this message, it was beneficial for them to go over the basic stuff. Okay, so I'm coming to understand that we've been running over this light as it comes up. We're running with it, and we haven't taken time to really settle into it. If you're not familiar with the 3 touches, then you really can't even be involved with the argument that's going on about the 3 touches, okay? Because this is where it's all taking place. Is Daniel having sin removed with those 3 touches, or is Daniel's sin removed before those 3 touches? Okay, this is big stuff, and I don't intend to get to that level, but let's start in Daniel 10 verse 7. And I wasn't going to go to 10:7. I'll go to verse 5. I was going to assume that we all knew the 3 touches, but now we'll talk about them. Verse 5. Daniel's been fasting for 21 days. Okay, if you start in verse 2 and 3, he's been fasting. Verse 1 is the first thing that we're told about this last vision of Daniel, and the last vision of Daniel is chapter 10, 11, and 12. And the first thing we're told about the last vision of Daniel in verse 1 is he has understanding of the vision and he has understanding of the thing. He understands it all. Okay? And then he's fasting for 21 days. And then in verse 5, he's going to have the Mare experience. Okay? And verse 5 says, Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like the beryl, and his face was as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms as feet, and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. Now, that word appearance is mare. What do you suppose it means? It means appearance. Okay, but in Daniel 8 and onward, when you're talking about the 2 visions that Daniel grapples with, you have the Hazon vision contrasted with the Mara vision. And the way that we've defined typically, this means complete at the Hebrew. But we say this is the vision of prophetic history. Pardon me? I said, so I'm not going crazy. No, that's the Hazon. But the Mare is the appearance of Christ. All right, now, and that's what Daniel has just seen here in verses 5 and 6. And when he says his appearance was like, it is the Hebrew word Mare, that in other places, like in Daniel 8, is translated as a vision. Okay? So through the years, we've spent much time contrasting these 2 visions. Every one of us, either for good or bad, are going to come into the judgment, and we're going to be face to face with Christ. Okay, when we have this face to face experience with Christ, if we're on the good side of it, if we're on the right side of it, then it's not going to destroy us. It's not going to be a punishment. And there's an experience that takes place when you have this appearance, okay? And I'm making a point of this so we can read the next couple of verses and add something to it. In verse 7, it says, And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. And this word vision is not mare, but it's close to it. It's mara. And the difference is this is the feminine, and this is the masculine. So they're the same word, so to speak. You know, in Spanish, I'm the esposo, I'm the husband, my wife is the esposa. One letter, O or A, makes a distinction between feminine and masculine. Mare is the masculine, mara is the feminine, and the meaning of this is looking glass. And if I recall right, because I haven't presented this for a long time, if I recall right, the first mention of Mara is where Moses is having the brethren bring the materials to build the sanctuary, and the materials to bring the laver is the looking glasses that the women brought out of Egypt, okay? Looking glass in the Bible is the law of God. You look into the looking glass, you see who and what you are, okay? So Daniel is describing an experience of God's people at the end of the world. Daniel's a righteous person, and in verse 1 he has understanding of the vision and understanding of the thing. He has complete understanding here at the end of the world. He's in a fast, and then he has this appearance of Christ which is going to humble him in the dust. But what it produces in him is this experience that's typified by the Mara. So he looks in Christ, he's going to fall as one dead in the ground. And he doesn't say fall as one dead here, but Sister White says that, basing it upon a parallel with John. But once he's fallen down as dead, he's going to be touched 3 times, okay, to revive him, okay. So in verse 7 it says, I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. That's Mara, that's the feminine. For the men that were with me saw not the vision, same word, Mara, feminine. But a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. So when this vision takes place, Daniel is together with a group of people, and the 2 classes are separated right then and there. Okay, the men that did not have the experience of Daniel, they fled because of the quaking, or in the terminology that we use in Adventism, because of the shaking. They just got shaken out. Verse 8, therefore I was left alone and saw this great vision, Mara, once again the feminine. And there remained no strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in me into corruption, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the voice of his words, and when I heard the voice of his words, then was I in a deep sleep on my face, and my face toward the ground, and behold, a hand touched me. This is the first time he's going to be touched. And behold, a hand touched me, which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of my hands. And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright, for unto thee I am now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Then said he unto me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come forth for thy words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. So when is it that, by your reading of this, and Sister White says that the prince of Persia is Satan. Okay, but he's going to remain with the kings of Persia, because the king of Persia is there too. Who's the king of Persia? Cyrus. Okay, so there's a struggle going on with Cyrus about whether he's going to follow through with allowing the Jews to go out of Babylon and build the temple. And Christ comes down as Michael to prevail over Satan and over Cyrus to get his head on straight. So when is it that Michael came? Does he come at the end of the 21 days or at the beginning of the 21 days? We just read the verses. Shall we read them again? In verse 12, then he said unto me, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come forth for thy words. Pardon me? You can establish that from that verse?
Yeah.
Does everyone agree with her?
That's what I was thinking.
You were thinking? Do you have a grammatical?
I hadn't said out loud. I was just thinking.
Okay. So can you explain that to me?
From the first day.
From the first...
From the first day, I am come for thy words.
No, yeah, I'm not... But when is it that...
First day of the 21 days.
For from the first day that thou did set thine heart to understand and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard.
And I am come.
He's talking to him.
I don't know that you can make that claim.
I think he heard him, right?
Yeah, he heard his prayers right from the beginning.
Came after the 21.
Even
It doesn't really specify.
it doesn't specify. Okay, Sister.
If you read on the next few verses, it seems like it's at the end that he comes.
Yeah, and I intended to read on, so let's go on to verse 13. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days, but lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. Now, I'm not arguing about when Gabriel comes to Daniel. That's at the end of the 21 days. That's self-evident. What I'm wondering is, can you establish when Michael came down and entered into the struggle? Because if you can nail down when Michael came down, then you have an illustration of 9/11 that is just black and white. You follow me? Verse 14, now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision, and this vision is his own vision, the vision is yet for many days. And when he had spoken such words unto me, I set my face toward the ground and become dumb. And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of man touched my lips. Here he's been touched for the second time. I don't think we can, from these passages, nail down exactly when Michael comes down. I wish we could. Are you still standing on that, or do you see my point? I'm talking about when Michael arrives on the scene, not when Gabriel comes to Daniel.
I'm not seeing the difference between Michael and Gabriel, so I can't say.
You're not seeing a difference between them?
Yeah. So in verse 12 that we were talking about, is that Michael or Gabriel that says, I am come for thy words? That would be,
That's Gabriel,
okay.
right? Yes, sister.
Would that be why the story of Lazarus is there, where it took how many days between the time he died and the time Jesus heard versus when he went there?
Okay, but let's get now the scope of this. All right, I was going to keep it open, but if it gets out of control, I have to just cut it off. That might get out of control. And I'm not rebuking you at all. It's just
We're going to change your name to Tanya.
no. Her name's fine as it is. Okay. So, verse 15, and when he had spoken such words to me, I set my face toward the ground and become dumb, and behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spake and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision, and this is the Mara, my sorrows are turned upon me, and I've retained no strength. For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? For as for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is there breath left in me. Then there came again and touched me one like the appearance, that appearance is mare, of a man, and he strengthened me. And he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be unto thee, be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. Okay, for those of you that may not be have been following this prophetic message very close, we're understanding that for the priests whose probation closes first, from midnight to the midnight cry is the binding off of the priest. And Sister White says the binding off message is the third angel's message. Okay, so what we've understood is that right here, what we've just read, is that there are 3 touches that take place that represent the binding off of Daniel. And in verse 18 and 19, there is one Hebrew word that is translated 2 ways. Okay, when in verse 18 where you see the word strengthened, you will see that word strengthened 2 more times in verse 19. That makes strengthened 3 times. But you see Daniel commanded to be strong, It's the same Hebrew word that's translated as strong. So in those two verses, you have this Hebrew word that is translated 3 times as strengthened and twice as strong. And the Hebrew word means to bind. Okay, so we're understanding that this is the binding off of the 5 wise priests, or if it's typifying Levites, 5 wise Levites, or 11th hour workers, 5 wise 11th hour workers. But here, and I'm getting to my point that you didn't know I was going to, in verse 19 when it says, be strong, what do you have?
Doubling.
You're doubling. Okay, so where does a doubling put you? Okay, is everyone familiar with that? The doubling is the midnight cry. We're often going to find things doubled at the midnight cry. But what does it represent? What does it...
It increases the spirit.
Okay, it can represent that. It can represent that too. Okay, but here's what I don't think we've focused in on, but we know it. We've been teaching it for a long time, but we haven't made a point of it. In Daniel chapter 2, I'll give you an example. There's a binding off illustrated by Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego when they're informed that all the wise men in Babylon are going to be slain. Okay? And the way they're informed is that Arioch comes to Daniel with haste. And then after Daniel asks Nebuchadnezzar for some time, and he prays with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and in the night season the Lord gives him an understanding of the dream, and he goes back to Arioch and says, I have the answer for Nebuchadnezzar. Then we're told that Arioch goes into Nebuchadnezzar with haste. The doubling on several witnesses is representing that the midnight cry waymark and the midnight waymark are the same. And we've already shared one witness with you. This is Samuel Snow preaching in Boston the very same message he's going to teach in Exeter. And I got double Exeters. Exeter. No, I don't. In the story of Lot, Lot closes the door behind him, and then shortly thereafter, the angels close the door. So what I'm saying to you is that the doubling of the midnight cry is emphasizing that the characteristics of the midnight cry waymark are also found here at midnight. Okay? And where I would go when I'm typically teaching this is in Isaiah, where you'll find 3 verses in 2 chapters that say, awake, awake. Okay, and the parable of the 10 virgins of Matthew 25 illustrates the experience of the Adventist people. That's Great Controversy 393. God's dealing with men is ever the same. So how he deals with the priests of Adventism is the same way he's going to deal with the Levites of Adventism. And the door is going to close at midnight for the priests, and the door is going to close the same way for the Levites at the midnight cry. So the doubling is representing the fact that these 2 waymarks possess the same characteristics. Is that how you understand it? Do you see the logic even if you haven't tested that out? Okay, now I'm at the point to where I can challenge your thought. What I'm saying is, there is a teaching now that says there's no significant light before midnight. All right, so what is the logic for someone making that claim? It's right here, what we just read, verse 19. And he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not, peace be unto thee, be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken unto me, I was strengthened, and said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. Then said he, Knowest thou wherefore I am come unto thee? And now will I return to fight with the prince of Persia, and when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. But I will show you that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael, your prince. What did that just teach? Did you see it? You didn't see it? You got to see it, because this is a struggle. This is an argument.
It's noted about the 3 touches.
Well, the 3 touches, I didn't deal with that.
Well, that's what you noted. And what's noted in Scripture.
Okay, for those of you that haven't followed the 3 touches, I'm saying that when you go in the binding off experience, there's an empowerment going to take place on God's people that's represented by 3 steps, 3 touches. This is Christ in Gethsemane that's saying, not my will, but thy will, O Lord, 3 times. There's several illustrations of this 3-step process. This is the binding off. But my argument is that it's after this. And we know it's at the midnight cry because the pronouncement is, be strong, be strong. Then Gabriel comes and says, now I will show you Daniel 11. That's after the door closes. And I'm here arguing that Daniel 11 is opened up before the door closes. Okay? So you've just got acquainted with the point of contention. And you're going to have to settle that in your own mind. Do you see the distinction that I'm making? We are teaching that when verse 19 says, be strong, that's marking the midnight cry. And immediately thereafter, Gabriel shows up and says, now I'm going to show you what's noted in the scripture of truth. And the scripture that follows is Daniel 11. Okay, so he's saying at the end of the world, it's after the midnight cry when Gabriel opens up Daniel 11. So when someone's arguing, oh, there's no significant light on Daniel 11 until after midnight, this is the logic.
Well, God wouldn't shut a door on anybody unless he's already shown them the way.
God wouldn't shut a door on anyone unless
The
he's...
shut door comes after we have the wisdom and
Okay,
understanding.
yeah, I get that. I'm on that side of the issue. But I'm trying to be fair here, so everyone sees this issue, okay? Where I go to is verse 1 of Daniel 10. Go to verse 1. You've got to grapple with verse 1 because of the rule of first mention. Verse 1 says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar. And the thing was true, and the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing, and he had understanding of the vision. Daniel understands all this before he gets to this experience here. It's already in the record, he had understanding. This experience is illustrating this experience so we can understand this experience. But it's based upon line. We need to know when to stop the lines and take a line as a line. First thing we're told about this vision is Daniel has understanding of these things. Okay, but in this history here, this is midnight. Our first reference to midnight, the place that we learned midnight was that Samuel Snow went to Boston on July 21st and gave the identical message that he gave at the Exeter camp meeting on August 15th. This is the doubling, midnight cry. But he gave this same message. He printed it, he published it on May 2nd, before midnight. Therefore, before midnight, we will publish, God's people will publish the message of Samuel Snow all over again. And what is the message of Samuel Snow? It's the midnight cry message. All right, it's the midnight cry message. Are you all with me? Did I throw you by the observation about be strong, be strong? No? You made it clearer? The argument clearer. Okay, so let me go to another set of notes here. This set of notes I may have. Not to hand out, but on my laptop. And nobody needs this, right? All right, this here, up here, standard illustration of the 7 thunders at a very basic level. In 1798, the book of Daniel was unsealed. And William Miller up here, he comes to understand the increase of knowledge that comes from the unsealing of the book of Daniel. And the message that he understands, the first thing that he understands, is that the Lord is going to return in 1843. And we summarize that message as the judgment hour message. The first thing that Miller understands is the judgment hour message. And his whole message is the judgment hour message. But the very first thing that he understands is the judgment hour message. And what's the judgment hour message? It's the first angel's message of Revelation 14. Go to Revelation 14. And in verse 6, it says, "And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him. For the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of water." The judgment hour message is identifying the hour of his judgment coming. Right? And what did Miller think that was? When did he think it was? He thought it was the second coming in 1843. But did he come back in 1843? 1843 passes. So from the first day of the first month of 1844, the Lord is now using Samuel Snow to develop the midnight cry message. And what is the midnight cry message? Yeah, you got those are right answers. The answer I'm looking for is this is the perfection of William Miller's judgment hour message. William Miller believed the Lord was returning in 1843. Did he return in 1843? No. Samuel Snow's message down here, he not only gets the year right, he gets the day and the month right. Okay, so the midnight cry message is the perfection of the judgment hour message. Now, they're both still thinking the Lord is going to return to the earth, and he's not. He's going to move into the most holy place. He does come down. What does that mean? He does judge. Judgment does begin. Yeah, yes. But now here's what I want you to see, is in this history, there's a development of truth that begins at the time of the end in 1798 when the book of Daniel is unsealed. And the development of this truth, it escalates. It's an increase of knowledge. And it's illustrated in Revelation 5 and onward. Go to Revelation 5. Now, sometimes I lose the brethren here at this point. I taught this in the last trimester, right at the beginning of the trimester, this particular study in more detail. And I went through what I'm going to try to show you now is that the Millerite history, even though it's 7 thunders, it's also where the 7 seals are opened up. And the first class, one of the first classes, perhaps the first class I taught to these students in the last trimester, was to show that in this history, there are 7 seals opened up. The final seal is the midnight cry message, okay? And the midnight cry message is the identical message of William Miller. Do you understand that? It's the identical message. It's a judgment hour message. You know, I'm saying identical, but all Samuel Snow does is he perfects it. He gets the right year, the right day, and the right month, but it's the same message. They both thought the Lord was returning. So, because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning, in this history, which is the history of the 7 thunders, the truth that is opened up first is going to be the truth that is perfected last. Okay, but in Revelation chapter 5, verse 1, It says, I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written within, and I got to tell you before I go any further. So here's where I can lose you, all right? Is you can, if you take the time, and I'm not going to take the time, I'm summarizing this down very greatly compared to an hour-and-a-half class that I did with those students. If you take the time, you can show that the 7 seals are opened up in this history, therefore the 7 seals are going to be opened up in our history as well. And for whatever reason, I had no idea what Dwayne Dewey was going to teach when he came into class immediately after me, but where he decided to start is he was going to teach that class the pioneer understanding of the 7 seals. And the pioneer understanding of the 7 seals is history. The history of the first seal is the history of the church of Ephesus. The history of the second seal is the church of Smyrna. Okay, that's the pioneer understanding of the 7 seals, and it's correct. So those students, when Dwayne got out of there, Dwayne was scratching his head. Why aren't they getting this? This is basic, this is easy. Well, he didn't understand. I had just taught them the 7 seals was the history of 1798 to 1844. And he walked in there and told them the pioneer understanding of the 7 seals. So if you have the pioneer understanding of the 7 seals, I'm not denying that. What I'm saying is, according to William Miller's rule, symbols can have more than one meaning. And in this context, what we're going to see here in Revelation 5 and onward is Christ's work in removing 7 seals from his word. In verse 1 of Revelation 5, it says, And I saw in the right hand of him that sat on the throne a book written and within and on the backside sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, Who is worthy to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof? And no man in heaven, nor earth, nor under the earth was able to open the book, neither to look thereon. And I wept much, because no man was found worthy to open the book and to read the book, neither to look thereon. And one of the elders said unto me, Weep not, behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, hath prevailed to open the book and to loose the 7 seals thereof. And behold, in the midst of the throne and of the 4 beasts, and in the midst of the elders stood a lamb as it had been slain, having 7 heads, 7 horns, and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God sent forth into all the work. And he came and he took the book out of the right hand of him that sat upon the throne. Okay, so God the Father is the one that's holding this book. It's sealed with 7 seals. The Lion of the tribe of Judah is obviously Christ, because he's the Lamb that was slain. And he's the one that has prevailed, has the ability to open the book, but he doesn't open the book until John weeps. Okay? And then in chapter 6, just to make one more point before we go to the spirit of prophecy. Chapter 6, verse 1, it says, And I saw when the Lamb opened one of the seals, and I heard, as it were, the noise of thunder, one of the 4 beasts saying, Come and see. That's the first seal. And the second seal, verse 3, And when he had opened the second seal, I heard the second beast say, Come and see. And the third seal, in verse 5 says, And when he had opened the third seal, I heard the third beast say, Come and see. And the fourth seal, verse 7, And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, Come and see. So when the seals are opened, you have the expression, Come and see. So in manuscript releases, volume 20, that's 20 MR, page 197. And then Signs of the Times, July 11th, 1906. All right, I'll read those. She's commenting on what we've just read, chapter 5, chapter 6 of Revelation. She says, There in his open hand lay the book with 7 seals. The roll of the history of God's providences, the prophetic history of nations and the church. Herein was contained the divine utterances. His authority, his commandments, his laws, the whole symbolic counsel of the eternal, and the history of all ruling powers in the nations. In symbolic language was contained in that roll the influence of every nation, tongue, and people from the beginning of Earth's history to its close. This is the book that has the divine utterances and has the history of God's providence. It has the history of every nation in it, because Sister White says every nation goes through, God's dealing with men is ever the same, and God's dealing with every nation is ever the same. So every nation, every human being goes through the same interaction with Christ in terms of their salvational judgment. So the next quote from Signs of the Times, July 11th, 1906, in the previous quote, she spoke about the divine utterances. Here she says, "Let everyone who has been blessed with reasoning faculties take up the Bible and search its pages, that he may understand the will of God concerning him. In this book, divine instruction is given to all." So I'm arguing that when you take the Spirit of Prophecy quote, she's clear that the book that is sealed with 7 seals is the Bible. Okay? So in Great Controversy 356, we all know this one. She identifies the time of the end as 1798. The book of Daniel is unsealed. There's going to be an increase of knowledge from this point forward. And though we don't know it much here at the end of the world, the pioneers understood that when the book of Daniel was unsealed in Daniel chapter 12, that was illustrating the same work of Christ removing the seals from the book of divine utterances one at a time. When Daniel describes the work of Christ opening up the biblical truth, he describes it as the book of Daniel being unsealed. But when John describes the very same work at the very same time, he describes the Lion of the tribe of Judah removing the seal from the Bible one at a time. And James White expresses this correct pioneer understanding in Review and Herald, November 1st, 1853. This is James White, Review and Herald, November 1st, 1853. What Daniel was commanded to seal up and close is now, through the all-powerful mediation of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, revealed unto us. Hence, many run to and fro, and knowledge is increased. The opening then and unfolding of the prophetic word is another convincing proof that we're arrived at the end of the age, the unsealing of prophecy and the revelation of the mystery of God being reserved unto the time of the end. Here James White is tying both of these activities together, the book of Daniel being unsealed, but in John's writings, in the book of Revelation, the unsealing of the book of Daniel is portrayed as 7 seals being removed. So what I'm saying is, in this history, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I'm not, there is a brother and sister in Alabama that have been working to identify what 7 prominent truths were opened up in Millerite history and what 7 prominent truths were opened up in our history, but I'm not claiming to know that. What I'm claiming to say is that the removing of the seals in the book of Revelation is illustrating a progressive development of truth, and it's the same work as the book of Daniel being unsealed. But when you have it broken up into 7 parts, as you do in Revelation, 1 through 7, then not only is this corresponding with this history being the 7 thunders, but it's allowing us to act upon the principle that Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. You follow me? And there isn't any Adventist that's going to be honest, that's going to deny that the first truth that Miller understands is the judgment hour message. That was his message. He is the messenger of the first angel, and the first angel's message is the judgment hour message. Rightly understood, there's no one that should deny that Samuel Snow's message is the judgment hour message that's brought to perfection. You follow that logic? Okay. This is important to see, because we understand it right here. The door closes. And here's a message that's coming before the door closes. It's the final message. There's a message that comes before the door closes. Now, we all know William Miller's dream, right? Well, if you haven't ever studied William Miller's dream in context of the unsealing of the 7 seals, You should. I'm not going to read William Miller's dream at this time, but, you know, there's a point in it, let me go to that point. Towards the end of the dream. Everyone knows the dream, right? If I don't read every little detail, you know the dream. Cutting into like the fourth paragraph from the end, even though the third paragraph from the end, even though one paragraph is just a sentence. Miller then says this, he then placed on the table a casket much larger and more beautiful than the former, and the casket is the Word of God. And at the beginning of his dream, the casket is the King James Bible, but it's bigger at the end. Okay, it's the Bible in the spirit of prophecy at the end. More beautiful than the former, and gathered up the jewels and diamonds, the coins by the handful, and cast them into the casket till not one was left, although some of the diamonds were not bigger than the point of a pin. Have you ever thought about that? Some of the diamonds are not bigger than the point of the pin. They're diamonds. They shine. But they're small compared to other ones. I mean, you can go through and make a list of verses in the Bible that address what took place at 9/11 that are also 9/11. You can do that. But you wouldn't do a sermon on that. But they are truth. They do shine. But they're not the big truth. There's all kinds of those little diamonds that are available now, okay? Some of them are big and profound. Some of them are just little small. But when he throws them into the casket, they all have their proper place. And once he throws them into the basket, it says, also, although some of the diamonds were not bigger than the point of a pin, he then called upon me to come and see. Okay, he's tying this in to his work in unsealing God's word and bringing it to light. I looked into the casket, but my eyes were dazzled with the sight. They shone 10 times their former glory. There's much to be said about that. I thought they had been scoured in the sand by the feet of those wicked persons who had scattered and trod them in the dust. They were arranged in beautiful order in the casket, every one in its place, without any visible pains of the man who cast them in. I shouted with very joy, and that shout awoke me. When do we get awoken? At midnight cry. Or midnight. Which is it, midnight or midnight cry? It's both, because it's the doubling, okay? They're both going to wake up, the priests and the Levites in this history, and they're going to go through the same experience. And at that time, everything's going to shine 10 times brighter. Okay, so let me get to my point. This history here is typifying our history. 1989, time of the end. What was our judgment hour message? To 45. Wasn't it?
Well, verse 40 for sure.
Verse 40 for sure. All of it. The rest is in progress. This here came to understand in 1996.
Which one?
This.
Oh, yeah. I was there.
You were there?
University of Valley Farm, Minnesota, 1996. I still have your notes.
Okay, all right. So this is paralleling this here, all right? This is 1831, the first time Miller publishes his message. It's the judgment hour message. The first time this is published is 1996, 95, 96, that time frame. So with that logic, are we going to have a message that is the seventh seal in our history? And what will that message be? On Daniel. Be more specific. We're bringing it to perfection. That's making it vague. Daniel 11, 40 to 45. This is the message that's going to get brought to perfection down here, and this is going to be the midnight cry message. And when did the midnight cry message, not when, did the midnight cry message arrive in history before the door closed? Yes, absolutely. Okay, where's the first midnight cry message? Pardon me? Okay, now you're talking about Millerite history. Good for you. You're taking me right at my words. When is the first midnight cry? Pardon me? Well, yeah, what are you saying? I'm hearing you mumble. You said
First midnight cry was in Exodus.
At Exodus. Is that not right? Exodus. In Exodus, there's a cry at midnight. How come? The firstborn are slain. Okay? The first Passover. The angel of death passes over. That's the first midnight cry. And the Bible says there's a cry at midnight. Was there a message given to Pharaoh that was going to take place in advance of it taking place? Okay, the rule of first mention says that every midnight cry that's being illustrated, there's going to be a message, a prediction that comes before midnight.
Praise God.
There has to be, because especially upon the rule of first mention. Okay, so you've got Millerite history. There's a prediction before midnight. You have Moses giving Pharaoh a prediction before midnight at the biblical level. You have the first seal opened in Millerite history being brought to perfection by the message of the midnight cry, thus teaching us that when Millerite history is repeated to the very letter in our history, that this message of Daniel 11, 40 to 45 will have to be brought to perfection right down here. And that's what's going on right now, is the line of the tribe of Judah has opened up the first 39 verses of Daniel 11, and it's put clarity into the last 6 verses of Daniel 11 that has never been recognized ever before. And he did so by removing his hand from verse 10 of Daniel 11 and allowing us to see that when the king of the south was swept away in 1989, we thought he was gone, but he wasn't. Russia was still standing there. And by doing that, he's developed an end-time scenario that is so in tune with current events that it's scary. Okay, so I have to make one more point, and I'm over time. Am I not, my brother?
You're 1 hour, 15 minutes right now.
And how long can you go?
I think it goes another 9 hours.
Oh, no. How about another less than 15 minutes? I want to make one more point in advance of tomorrow. And this may seem self-serving or whatever, but it's not. This is a legitimate point. I was talking to my wife the other day. It's after I thought this thought, and I thought, well, this is the way I can get her to see it right away. Is we went to church, when we became Adventists, we went to the same church for 19 years. And our children, my daughter was 3 years old when we moved there, and my son was born after we were Adventists. He was born after we were already Adventists. So our children grew up with children in this church family for 19 years. Okay, so we were that. And this isn't like one of your Adventist churches in the city where you can go to this one over here or go 5 miles over to this other Seventh-day Adventist church, or 20 over there. If you get offended with someone, you can go somewhere else. It isn't that. The church we were at was out in the middle of the desert. And if you wanted to go to another church, you're going about an hour and a half to go to Bakersfield or an hour and a half to go to Palmdale. You pretty much, you're in that church family, okay? And we grew up with those people, and I ran this by her. I started naming people that we used to rub shoulders with on a regular basis. Says, you know, since we moved away from there and started into self-supporting work, how many times have we ever seen them? Never. How about them? Never. How about them? Never. Now, there's a reason for that. You know, the last few years that I was there, I was pretty well alienated from that church family. They didn't want to hear, you know, they'd had enough of me before we moved out of there. But still, we'd grown up with those people. Their children grew up with our children. We were close friends. And I says, but you remember, there was one brother we ran into. We had a meeting at Camp Cedar Falls, some meetings, and he showed up there. And it's just weird that he's one of those people that showed up there. And while he was there, I remembered, it popped into my mind, that back sometime in that history, he had married a girl that was an Adventist, and her Adventist husband left her, and then he met her. So they got married while we knew him, and we started giving him Bible studies to try to make him an Adventist. Okay, that's what you do. And we were having Bible studies with him and a bunch of people for a long period of time, and I remembered that when we were having Bible studies with him, that we came across this study about line upon line, about the prophetic pattern. So he comes to this meeting probably 6, 8 years ago out of the clear blue sky, because we never see any of those people anymore. And it popped in my mind to ask him, hey, when was it that you married her? I know her name, I'm just not using it. Because I remember that at the time period that we were studying the prophetic pattern, they got married, and they got married in our backyard. So it was something that we had a real nice backyard for out in the desert. And he says, well, we got married on whatever month and day it was, 1989. And I said, whoa, okay. I had speculated when we first began studying the line upon line prophetic pattern, but his marriage had marked it, and I never even thought of any significance of it. It was years and years ago. And I asked him that question, and then it was put in place. 1989 is when we started studying the line upon lines, and I know that of a certainty. That was the time of the end. And we went to after that, a couple of years after that, how many of you ever heard of John Osborne? Okay. How many of you know where John Osborne got famous? John Osborne got famous, he went to Loma Linda, and he did a series of meetings in Loma Linda. And some of the things that he taught were so provocative, so off the wall. That's what got him really noticed. But before he went to Loma Linda, he went to a town out in the high desert, which was close to where we lived. It was in Lancaster. And we went down there. We had never heard of this guy, and that's where I knew he was wrong when he was teaching Daniel 11:40-45, and I went to him, I says, I don't know what those verses represent, but I know you're wrong. And he says, well, why is that? I says, well, because you're going literal here, and you're going over to figurative here, and then you're going back to literal and to figurative. I says, it's got to be one or the other. It's either got to be literal, it's got to be figurative. And he says, well, yeah, you ought to go study it. Okay, that's 1991. Okay. 1989, 1991, this time period here, this is the time of the end. We used to think, brothers and sisters, we used to teach that 1989 was a point in time. 1798 was a point in time. Now we understand the time of the end, it's a period of time. And now we understand the time of the end even has two waymarks in it, 1989 and 1991. My point is this. What was opened up at the time of the end in 1989 was not only the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, but it was the prophetic pattern. Okay, the prophetic pattern was first, as a matter of fact. And through God's providential leading, believe it or not, I ended up here in Eatonville. And the guy that was the leader, some of you guys know the leader of this ministry up here, he was very, what's the word? Flamboyant? No, he wasn't flamboyant. He was very impulsive. There's the word. Impulsive. You look up in the dictionary, impulsive, and you're going to see his picture there. And he was down in San Diego. Some of you may remember this story. And they needed a printer. So he invited a guy to come be his printer. Do you remember that guy? Yeah. Okay. And this guy gets to Hope International. Hope International at that period of time, it's one of the premier ministry for railing up on the Seventh-day Adventist Church for the sins that are in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So it's right on the top of the wall at that point, okay. These theologians are teaching Protestant doctrine, so it's right there on the front lines. And this guy moves up from San Diego to be their printer, and I'm talking to him like the first day because I'm working there too. And I don't remember the conversation, but somehow Ellen White comes up and he goes, "Who's Ellen White?" I says, "What do you mean?" He'd just been baptized. He says, "You don't know who Ellen White is?" "No, who's Ellen White?" "You're a Seventh-day Adventist?" "Yes." "You're working here and you don't know who Ellen White is?" "Yeah, well, tell me who Ellen White is." So whether you realize it or not, you came that study. I says, we got to get you up to speed.
Wasn't it that crippled guy?
Yes. I says, we got to get you up to speed. You got to come to understand who Ellen White is. So we started having a Bible study in our home up there at this ministry. And before long, there's like 10 or 15 people coming to this Bible study. And it went on for a long period of time. You used to come to it. And there came a point in time where we went through this prophetic pattern material. You know, how every history is the same history, and the people that were there at Hope, they started saying, wow, this is cool stuff. And it wasn't through any efforts of my own, but it was through the staff at Hope at that point that they went to the leadership there and says, hey, the next camp meeting, this needs to be taught. That's what opened the door for it being taught, was those kind of providential leading. And we never thought anything about it at that time. But what I want you to see, I'm making a specific point here. The first thing that's opened up is the lineup online, and the first thing that was taught publicly by this ministry was lineup online, even before the last 6 verses of Daniel 11. Okay? So my point is this, if you can follow my point. This here has to be brought to perfection before the door closes down here. It's been typified by Snow's Midnight Cry message. It's the message that leads to the closed door. It is the 7th seal of our history. And when the Lord removed his hand from the fullness of the year mistake at the end of 1843, that's the point in time where Samuel Snow's message can go through the roof. And when the Lord removed his hand from verse 10 of Daniel 11 in December of last year, what's happened is that we now recognize that the first 39 verses of Daniel 11, they provide the clarity and the structure for the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, like we've never seen before. But the way that they do it, and this is the point I hope you can get as we close here, the way that they do it is verse 1 of Daniel 11 is its own line. Verse 2 is its own line. Verse 3 and 4 is its own line. Verse 5 is its own line. Verse 6 through 9 is its own line. Verse 10 is its own line. 11 and 12 is a line. 13 through 15 is a line. 16 through 22 is a line. 23 through 29 is a line. 30 through 36 is a line, and 37 through 39 is a line. They're all lines, and if you can't see the break in the lines and treat these verses as a history that stand upon themselves in order to bring them into the established understanding of the last 6 verses of Daniel 11, then you can't see it. If you can't do that, you can't see it. But what the removing of his hand from verse 10 did is it gave a point of reference to recognize in those first 39 verses many lines that have to be brought together line upon line. And my point is this: the perfection of this message of Daniel 11:40 to 45 down here is based upon men and women that have the aptitude at this point to use line upon line with the first 39 verses of Daniel 11 to perfect the prophetic message of Daniel 11:40 to 45. And that's the key, that's the trick, and it's pretty much, it's not put in place, but it's pretty close. Okay, so tomorrow we'll take it from there. Any questions? I hope you didn't take me wrong. You were you.
So are you going to show us those lines?
Yeah, not all of them, because
Some of them?
there's not enough time. We tried it in Central California last week,
Okay.
and I only got halfway through.
So now you'll do the
But I intend to show you the lines and tell you what they are and then go back and teach some of them. So you can see the lines, why they're lines unto themselves. Does everyone know what I mean by that? Do you?
So each,
What, line of prophecy?
Yeah, do you understand that when I say verse 37 through 39 is its own line?
Yes.
Okay, so we're on the same.
verse 1 is its own line, so it can be paralleled with the other ones.
Verse 1 is the time of the end. Okay. Verse 2 is the history of the presidents of the United States. Verse 3 and 4 is the transition from the United States to the United Nations. Verse 5 is the conquering of 3 enemies to establish the King of the North. Verses 6 through 9 is the papacy receiving its deadly wound. Verse 10 is 1989, the sweeping away of the Soviet Union. Verse 11 and 12 is the Battle of Raphia. Verses 13 through 15 is the Battle of Panium. 16 through 23, another witness to the presidents of the United States. 22. Anyway, that's what we intend to do.
She's got this paper that Elaine has done where she's broke it up.
Yep.
Oh, let me know.
What we said.
Shall we pray?